The Iran-Iraq War, a grueling 8-year conflict from 1980 to 1988, left an indelible mark on the Middle East. This war, often referred to as the First Gulf War, was one of the longest conventional wars of the 20th century. It was characterized by trench warfare reminiscent of World War I and saw the use of chemical weapons, ballistic missiles, and extensive aerial bombardments. It was a war of attrition, a war of ideology, and a war fueled by historical animosity. The conflict was deeply rooted in the complex history of the region, with both nations seeking to assert their dominance. Iran, under the new Islamic Republic, sought to export its revolutionary ideals, while Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, aimed to establish itself as the leading Arab power. Millions perished in the fighting, economies were shattered, and the political landscape of the region was reshaped. The war caused immense human suffering, with countless civilians caught in the crossfire. Cities were reduced to rubble, and the infrastructure of both nations was severely damaged, setting back their development by decades. The war's legacy continues to cast a long shadow, influencing regional dynamics and international relations to this day. The animosity between Iran and Iraq persisted long after the ceasefire, affecting their foreign policies and alliances. The conflict also had a profound impact on the broader Middle East, contributing to ongoing instability and shaping the geopolitical landscape. Understanding this conflict is crucial to grasping the complexities of the Middle East. The war exemplifies the intricate interplay of religion, politics, and power in the region. It also highlights the role of external powers in Middle Eastern affairs, as global superpowers and regional actors alike sought to influence the outcome of the conflict. The war pitted two powerful neighbors against each other: Iran, a nation in the throes of an Islamic revolution, and Iraq, led by the ambitious Saddam Hussein. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 had dramatically altered the political landscape, and Iraq saw an opportunity to capitalize on the perceived chaos in Iran. Saddam Hussein's regime, with its secular Ba'athist ideology, viewed the revolutionary fervor in Iran as a direct threat. Both nations possessed significant military capabilities, and were driven by a potent mix of nationalism, religious fervor, and a desire for regional dominance. The war saw the mobilization of vast resources, with both sides employing sophisticated weaponry and tactics. National pride and religious zeal fueled the conflict, making it a deeply personal and ideological struggle for many of those involved. The conflict drew in global powers, with the United States, Soviet Union, and other nations providing support to the warring sides. The Cold War context added another layer of complexity, as both superpowers sought to expand their influence in the strategically vital Middle East. The U.S., wary of the spread of Iranian revolutionary ideology, provided support to Iraq, while the Soviet Union, though initially neutral, eventually supplied arms to both sides. The Iran-Iraq War serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict and the enduring impact of historical grievances. The war left deep scars on the collective psyche of both nations, with memorials and commemorations serving as a testament to the lives lost. The displacement of millions of people and the long-term psychological trauma are part of the war's enduring legacy. The war's legacy is one of tragedy and missed opportunities. Despite the immense suffering, the conflict failed to resolve the underlying issues between the two nations. Diplomatic efforts to end the war were often hampered by mutual distrust and the desire for total victory, leading to prolonged hostilities and further devastation. It left both nations economically devastated and politically isolated. The cost of the war was staggering, with both Iran and Iraq facing enormous economic challenges in its aftermath. The international community's response was mixed, with both nations experiencing periods of isolation and sanctions that further hindered their recovery. The conflict also sowed the seeds for future conflicts, including the Persian Gulf War and the rise of extremist groups. The power vacuum and instability created by the war contributed to the emergence of new threats, as regional and global actors sought to exploit the situation for their own gain. The legacy of the Iran-Iraq War is thus intertwined with the broader history of conflict and extremism in the Middle East. The Iran-Iraq War serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition, the horrors of modern warfare, and the importance of diplomacy and understanding in a volatile region. It underscores the need for dialogue and cooperation in addressing the complex challenges of the Middle East, and the vital role of international efforts in promoting peace and stability. The Iran-Iraq War did not erupt in a vacuum. It was the culmination of a long history of conflict and rivalry between the two nations. Deep-seated historical, religious, and territorial disputes fueled the animosity between the two nations. These disputes were not merely political but were deeply rooted in the cultural and religious fabric of both societies. For centuries, Persia, which is modern-day Iran, and Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, were rivals for regional dominance. The Persian Empire, with its rich history and culture, often found itself at odds with the civilizations that arose in Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. These ancient empires clashed repeatedly, leaving behind a legacy of mistrust and resentment. The battles were not just for territory but for cultural and religious supremacy, each side seeking to impose its way of life on the other. In the 20th century, new tensions arose. The discovery of oil in the region added a new dimension to the rivalry, as both nations sought to control this valuable resource. Border disputes, particularly over the Shatt al-Arab waterway, a crucial shipping route, became a major point of contention. Control over this waterway meant economic power and strategic advantage, making it a flashpoint for conflict. The rise of Arab nationalism in the mid-20th century further strained relations, as did the 1953 coup in Iran, orchestrated by the United States and the United Kingdom, which toppled the democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh and installed the pro-Western Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. This intervention by foreign powers sowed seeds of distrust and resentment that would later fuel the flames of war. The 1979 Iranian Revolution, which overthrew the Shah and brought Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini to power, dramatically altered the regional landscape. The revolution was not just a political upheaval, but a profound cultural and religious shift that sent shockwaves throughout the Middle East. Khomeini's revolutionary zeal and his vision of exporting the Islamic Revolution alarmed many Arab leaders, particularly Saddam Hussein. The idea of a Shia-led revolution spreading across the predominantly Sunni Arab world was a direct threat to the existing political order. Saddam, a ruthless dictator who had seized power in Iraq in 1979, saw an opportunity to exploit Iran's post-revolutionary chaos and establish himself as the dominant power in the Persian Gulf. He believed that by attacking a weakened Iran, he could not only expand Iraq's territory, but also position himself as the leader of the Arab world, countering the influence of the newly established Islamic Republic of Iran. The stage was set for a brutal and protracted conflict. Both nations mobilized their forces, preparing for a war that would last for 8 long years and result in devastating losses on both sides. The roots of hostility ran deep, and the war that followed was a tragic testament to the enduring legacy of historical, religious, and territorial disputes. On September 22, 1980, Iraqi forces launched a surprise attack on Iran, marking the official start of the Iran-Iraq War. Saddam Hussein, emboldened by Iran's perceived weakness and fueled by his own ambitions, calculated that a swift and decisive victory was attainable. He aimed to seize control of the oil-rich Khuzestan province in southwestern Iran and topple the Islamic Republic, replacing it with a pro-Iraqi regime. The Iraqi invasion initially caught Iran off guard. The Iranian military, still reeling from the revolution and purges of its officer corps, was ill-prepared for a full-scale invasion. Iraqi forces equipped with Soviet-made tanks and aircraft made significant early gains, capturing several Iranian border towns and advancing into Khuzestan. The Iraqi offensive, however, soon stalled. Iranian resistance, though initially disorganized, stiffened. The Iranians employed a combination of regular army units, Revolutionary Guard forces, and volunteer militias known as the Basij. These forces, motivated by religious fervor and a fierce defense of their homeland, launched determined counterattacks against the Iraqis. As the initial Iraqi offensive faltered, the momentum of the war shifted dramatically. What was initially expected to be a swift and decisive campaign turned into a prolonged and grueling conflict. The Iran-Iraq War descended into a brutal war of attrition, characterized by relentless and often futile attempts to gain ground. Both nations found themselves locked in a deadly stalemate, with neither side able to secure a definitive advantage. Both sides dug in along a sprawling front that stretched for hundreds of miles, creating an extensive network of trenches and fortifications. This static front line became a symbol of the war's grinding nature. Trench warfare, reminiscent of World War I, became the defining feature of the conflict. Soldiers endured harsh conditions, with mud, disease, and constant shelling becoming part of their daily lives. Human wave attacks, often involving poorly trained and equipped Iranian volunteers, resulted in staggering casualties. These assaults, though courageous, were met with devastating firepower from entrenched Iraqi positions. The war at sea, primarily focused on the Persian Gulf, also escalated. The strategic importance of this waterway meant that control over it was fiercely contested by both sides. Both Iran and Iraq targeted oil tankers in an attempt to cripple each other's economies. This phase of the conflict, known as the Tanker War, saw numerous vessels damaged or destroyed. This tanker war disrupted global oil supplies and drew international condemnation. The attacks on oil tankers not only threatened the economies of the warring nations, but also had far-reaching implications for the global oil market. The United States and other Western nations provided naval escorts to Kuwaiti tankers, fearing the economic and political ramifications of a major disruption to oil flow from the region. This intervention highlighted the global stakes of the conflict. The stalemate on the ground and the escalating tanker war had profound implications for the conflict. Both sides were forced to adapt their strategies, seeking new ways to break the deadlock. The war dragged on, with neither side able to achieve a decisive victory. The prolonged engagements took a heavy toll on the soldiers, who faced exhaustion, dwindling supplies, and the constant threat of death. The human cost soared, with hundreds of thousands killed and wounded on both sides. The scale of the casualties was staggering, leaving deep scars on the nations involved and their populations. The international community, increasingly alarmed by the war's regional and global consequences, intensified efforts to broker a ceasefire. Diplomatic initiatives were launched, and peace talks were held in an attempt to bring an end to the hostilities. But these efforts were met with resistance from both Iran and Iraq. The leadership of both nations remained defiant, unwilling to compromise or concede, prolonging the suffering and devastation of the war.